You twist the cap off a bottle of water. It's cold. It's clean. You drink it without a single thought, because nothing in your world is more ordinary than a safe sip of water. But for most of human history, that sip was a gamble your ancestors learned to manage, yet could never fully trust. The river water carried dysentery. The town well carried typhoid. And the drink people actually counted on to keep them alive, the drink they handed to laborers, monks, and even children, was beer. Think about that. The drink your world treats as a weekend indulgence was once a survival tool. Today, humans drink around 190 billion liters of beer every year, almost all of it for fun. For thousands of years, it was something far more serious. It was breakfast. It was wages. It was medicine. So how did fermented barley water become the most trusted drink in the ancient world and medieval Europe? To answer that, we have to go back further than you might expect. Not hundreds of years, not even a few thousand. We're going to the very edge of civilization itself. In the Zagros Mountains of what is now Iran, archaeologists excavated a site called Godin Tepe, a trading outpost that was already busy more than 5,000 years ago. In one room, they found a pottery jar with strange yellowish residue crusted into the grooves. A team including biomolecular archaeologist Patrick McGovern tested that crust. It was calcium oxalate, what brewers call beer stone. Beer stone is a telltale sign of barley beer, and that unremarkable jar is some of the oldest hard evidence of brewing on the planet, dating to around 3,400 BCE, before most of humanity could read or write. Here's the detail that should stop you cold. Writing and beer show up in the same place, at almost the same time, among the same people. The Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia gave the world its first known writing system, and they used it to track grain, rations, and beer. One of their most famous documents is the Hymn to Ninkasi, a poem pressed into clay around 1800 BCE. Ninkasi was their goddess of beer, and the hymn praises her step by step, mixing the dough, cooking the mash, filtering the sweet liquid. Read it closely and you realize what it actually is. A recipe. A brewing manual disguised as a prayer, sung so that even people who couldn't read could brew correctly. When a civilization sets its beer recipe to music and calls it worship, what does that tell you about how much their survival depended on it? Now travel southwest to Egypt. You've probably heard the pyramids were built by slaves. The evidence says otherwise. Archaeologist Mark Lenner spent years excavating the lost city of the pyramid builders at Giza, and what he found looks less like a slave camp and more like a company town, with bakeries and breweries operating on an industrial scale. The workers who hauled those stones were paid in bread and beer. Their standard ration? Several liters of beer a day, issued like a paycheck. This wasn't the crisp lager in your fridge. It was thick, cloudy, mildly alcoholic, and packed with calories and B vitamins, closer to drinkable porridge. The Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text from around 1550 BCE, even folds beer into dozens of prescriptions. To an Egyptian laborer, beer wasn't a treat. It was the reason he could work at all. Let me paint the scene. It's a spring morning in ancient Mesopotamia. You step into a low mud brick doorway. The air is warm and smells of sour dough and sweet grain. A brewer, and she is almost certainly a woman because brewing was women's work in most household and community settings, leans over a wide clay vat, skimming husks off a bubbling mash. Workers crowd in from the fields and hand over tokens for their daily ration. There are no cups. Long reed straws stand in a shared jar because the beer is unfiltered and the straw lets you pull liquid from below the floating grain. An overseer marks each ration on a damp clay tablet in some of the earliest writing a human hand ever made. Nobody in that room is drinking to get drunk. They're drinking lunch. But now comes the twist. Because if you've heard this story before, you've probably heard it told like this. Medieval water was deadly. Everyone knew it. so everyone drank beer instead. It's one of the most repeated claims in food history. And it's not quite true. Historians who actually study the records point out that medieval people drank water all the time. They drank from springs and wells, they built public fountains and aqueducts, and wrote about which sources tasted best. A gulp of clean well water wouldn't kill you, and your ancestors knew it. What they could not do was explain why one well was fine and the neighboring one was lethal, because germ theory wouldn't arrive until Louis Pasteur in the 1860s. Water wasn't always dangerous. It was unpredictable. And unpredictable, when the stakes are cholera, is its own kind of terrifying. Beer solved that unpredictability by accident. Nobody in history brewed beer to sterilize it. Yet look at what brewing actually does. The water is boiled with the grain. Boiling kills nearly every pathogen. Fermentation adds alcohol and drives down the pH, making the liquid mildly acidic, an environment where cholera and typhoid bacteria struggle to survive. Later, medieval brewers added hops, which turned out to be naturally antibacterial. Every step made beer safer, and every step was invented for taste, strength, or shelf life. Safety was the accident. Isn't it strange that one of the great public health tools of the pre-modern world worked for reasons its makers never understood? And here's the part almost everyone gets wrong. The real reason beer flowed through daily life wasn't fear of water. It was food. The food historian Rie Tannehill described ancient beer as something close to liquid bread, and that's exactly how your ancestors treated it. A liter of medieval ale delivered hundreds of calories, plus nutrients that a diet of coarse bread and pottage badly lacked. Records from English households and monasteries show laborers could receive a daily ration approaching a gallon, that's nearly 4 liters, of ale. Even the average person, including children, consumed over a liter of weak, barely alcoholic, small beer every day. Water was safe enough, most of the time, but water contained nothing. Beer was hydration and a meal in the same cup, from a source you could trust, because you knew it had been boiled and you knew the brewer by name. When almost every calorie you eat comes from grain, drinking your grain isn't a vice, it's efficiency. So what ended beer's 5,000-year reign as a daily staple? You did. Or rather, your world did. In 1908, Jersey City, New Jersey, became one of the first cities to routinely chlorinate its public water supply. Within a generation, cities worldwide followed, and typhoid deaths collapsed. For the first time in history, an ordinary person could turn a handle and get water that was safer than anything a brewer could make. Alongside the rise of cheap tea and coffee, which also required boiled water, and the demands of factory work that couldn't tolerate tipsy laborers, beer lost its oldest job. It stopped being food and became fun. Meanwhile, contaminated drinking water still kills hundreds of thousands of people globally every year. The problem your ancestors solved with a brewing vat hasn't been solved everywhere with a pipe. That history is still sitting in your kitchen, hiding in plain sight. The reason bread and beer feel like natural partners is that they were born as the same substance. Wet grain transformed by yeast. One baked, one poured. The hops in your neighborhood pale ale are there because medieval brewers needed beer to survive a long journey. Even the phrase liquid bread survives as a joke among beer lovers, 5,000 years after it was simply the truth. Next time someone raises a glass and says cheers, listen to what's underneath the word. It's the echo of a worker at Giza collecting his wages, a brewer singing to Ninkasi over a steaming vat, a medieval child drinking small beer at breakfast. So here you are, back at the start. You twist the cap off a bottle of water. It's cold. It's clean. And now you know that this boring, forgettable sip is the single greatest luxury in the history of drinking. The thing your ancestors spent 5,000 years of brewing, boiling, and praying to a beer goddess trying to achieve. They turned grain into safety. You just turn a cap. If this story gave you a new appreciation for your next pint or your next glass of tap water, hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to hear in the comments. If you could taste one ancient brew, from Sumerian beer to Egyptian ration ale, which would you try? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.